I would like to start with a first topic for tonight, and this will be the differences of metaphysics or worldview perspectives between the biblical, well, between the ancient Israelites and the other ancient Near East people back in the days. They all believed that the universe was had three layers: heaven, earth, and hell. They all had their gods, but Israel was different because unlike the pagan deities, Israel did recognize that these entities, the Elohim with small e, or the that territorial entities and spiritual beings, they do exist, but Yahweh is above all of them. So I was wondering if we can maybe start talking with that, and if you want me, I can share your chart.
Yeah, that would be great. Let's see. So, oh, there we go. Great. Okay, so here's a chart that I made up. This is the kind of a worldview, and you shouldn't take this as Bible, like they were thinking exactly this, right? This is my visual representation of what they were thinking. So this is the pagan worldview, how they thought of creation, how they thought of the gods in relation to humanity. So this is a bit simplistic, but I think it gets kind of some points across here. And I'll compare this to a biblical chart in a minute. But here we have the blue rectangle is the heavens, or the divine realm, however you want to say that. And the brown rectangle below that is humanity and the earth, so the mortal realm. So before anything was created, we had almost every single ancient Near Eastern creation text, which there aren't actually that many, which is a bit surprising. But there aren't that many creation texts that are centered on the creation of man or the creation of the world. But what we do have is they almost all start with something that exists already. So we don't have a pre-existing God of any sort. We have pre-existing, most of the time it's like water or some sort of chaos that's going on. So that's why I have those little swirly patterns all on the outside, because before anything was created, we had water or an external something that existed. Usually it was chaotic, it wasn't organized in any way. And then the water came together in some way and created and started creating the gods, right? They are created beings themselves. They're not existent in themselves. They're not transcendent. They are themselves created. And the way those gods create is the same way functionally as humanity creates, right? They create either through procreation or they create through forming matter. So like taking mud and creating a man out of that mud or something like that, like in a literal way. And the reason, we'll get into this a little bit later, I think, but the reason they create humanity is for serving them, because they were tired of working. So there's a codependent relationship between the gods and humanity. And the other thing I have on that image is the little king down there in the human realm. In the pagan world, the image of God, or a god, was either the king, who is supposed to be the representation of that god here on earth, or an idol that lived in the temple, right? So there was only a particular designated place for the image of that particular god, and they could switch things around. It wasn't the supreme creator who was the image. It was this god or that god, right? So that was one of the ways that humanity interacted with the gods to form this codependent relationship, right? Okay, so here we have more of the biblical view of creation. We have, at the top we have Yahweh God, who is supreme. He is transcendent. He is not dependent on anything. He does not procreate like humans or like the lower gods procreate. He creates by fiat, or by word. He says something and that something is created. So that's extremely different than the way the other gods create. And there are notions of chaos water in the Bible. Those are all created and controlled by God. So you see in this, we have the The blue rectangle is the heavens or the divine realm. The brown rectangle is the earth or humanity. And you see I have a little dotted line there on the right. That's because eventually those two things come together in the eschaton, right? So here we have a whole lot of differences in the purposes of creation. Instead of just the king or a physical wooden or stone idol, you have all of humanity who are to image God. That's a massive difference between the God of the Bible and the pagan gods. And of course, we had God who literally came down into creation to join himself with creation. So these are massive, massive differences. And so when we're looking at the similarities, yes, there are similarities, but when the scholars are only looking at those, that's a massive disconnect. All right, so here we see the two charts, they're side by side, and you see it's just such massive differences. There's similarities and yet the differences. Did you want to say anything about those charts or the differences that might pop out to you?
Yeah, I can say something briefly. Like you said, I believe it was in Enumelish where there was like this higher god who had these lower rank gods and who were like just lazy. They're like lazy bums. They didn't want to do anything. They didn't want to work. They're like, so their main deed is like, okay, let's create people so they can work for us. When you open the first few pages of Genesis, it's like way different than how God views us and as his image bears. Like, which God would die for you? Which God would love you even when you turn your back? I mean, which God would not, if we're talking about pagan gods, they would like to subdue you. They would like to use you. They would like you to be their slave. But the God of the Bible comes to you directly. And as we see in Genesis, he strolls with you. He walks with you. He meets you in the garden like your friend. He's not looking at you from above and like, just like, oh, you're not good enough. I'm going to, punish you. And, he wants to be not just your master, but friend. So yeah, there are huge differences in worldviews. So I appreciate, your graphs.
I love that you brought that up because people will complain about these kinds of parts in the Bible where it says Yahweh is a jealous God and Yahweh is the supreme God and Yahweh is against all of the gods. And people think, oh, well, that's awfully arrogant, right? Well, no, it's not when you have the supreme God who is doing this out of love and not just because he's trying to get something out of us. Like that, there's no real comparison there.